go along here. Give me 1 second. Go along here. All right, welcome everybody to In Good Hands. We are continuing to discuss faith and trust in God, something we need in all times, but particularly in these challenging days. This letter number 3, was written in the month of 1950, 5710. It was in response to the Rebbe had not yet accepted upon himself the leadership of the Chabad movement. And the letter was written by a chassid who was requesting a prayer, requesting a blessing that he and his colleagues should be worthy of the blessings for fulfilling that which the Rebbe, in this case, the Rebbe was referring to the previous Rebbe, had expected of them. So the Rebbe's response: by the grace of God, 3 Menachem of 5710, 1950, Brooklyn. Greetings and blessings. As to your prayerful wish that you and your colleagues should be vessels appropriate for the fulfillment of what is desired of you by the Rebbe, one should not be too dejected or doubtful, for this too is exploited by the evil inclination. So the Rebbe is saying that the notion of being dejected or being doubtful, questioning ourselves, is, sometimes we may think that the idea that we are evaluating in a judgmental way, we're being overly harsh on ourselves, overly particular on how we're showing up, we might perceive that as being a holy thing, a positive thing. I'm a growing person, and look at the reality. I haven't really grown that much, and that could cause us to be dejected or to be despondent. The Rebbe is saying is that this too is a feeling, an experience that is exploited by the evil inclination. It's not necessarily coming from a holy place. The Rebbe continues, as was recently discussed here at a Farbrengen, at a Hasidic gathering, it should not be forgotten that the entire subject of creation springs from the fact that it is in the nature of one who is benevolent to act benevolently, and it goes without saying that this reason influences the created universe and is discernible in it. So again, the Rebbe's explanation here is as follows. When the Medrash tells us that the nature of good is to do good. God is benevolent, and therefore God does good. That's the nature of one who is benevolent, is to do goodness. And so, if God is good and he does good, then the world around us must be a good world, because a good God only does good things. So after all of the above, one should approach his task with joy and with complete trust that God will show compassion and will offer help, and we will be greatly sanctified from above, provided only that we keep a firm grasp on the bond of hiskashrus, which I'll explain in a moment, with the tzaddik, who is now more accessible in the world of action too, with blessings to all the members of the brotherhood, the Rebbe's signature. So if we accept the premise that, number one, thoughts of negativity oftentimes are an exploit of the evil inclination, number one. Number two, if we recognize that God is good, and because God is good, he does good, and therefore the world, the created universe, must be a good world. So the result of that should be that one approaches how they deal with the world and how they deal with their service of God in a joyous manner. And as a result of that, we will be able to receive God's blessing, God's sanctity, and so on and so forth. That's the main punchline of this letter. So again, in summation, when we recognize that God is good and that sometimes the voices of doubt and negativity are coming from the evil inclination, we will in turn approach our service of God, our work on this earth in a positive way, and that itself will make us a worthy recipient of God's blessing and God's sanctity. At the end of the letter, the Rebbe says that there's one caveat, in particular in the case of this letter, where the writer of the letter is requesting that they be a worthy receptacle for doing what the Rebbe wants. The Rebbe is saying is that there's one prerequisite, and that is that one stays connected with the tzaddik, with the righteous, the one who gave them the instruction. Again, the Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, who's the one that instructed these individuals to do the holy work that they were engaged in, that one needs to stay connected. How do you stay connected with a tzaddik, particularly a tzaddik who's no longer in this physical world? So the answer is actually quite simple. When we follow the instructions of the tzaddik, as our sages say regarding our forefather Jacob, that just as Jacob was righteous, just as Jacob was alive, so too, the Talmud says that our forefather Jacob never died. And the Talmud asks the question, if that's the case, then how come the Torah tells us that Jacob died and he was embalmed? So the Talmud says that just as his children are alive, so too he is alive. What does that mean, that his children are alive? That means that when children live the life that their parents taught them and the parents expect of them, essentially the parents live on through them. And it's no different with a tzaddik, with a Rebbe, with a spiritual mentor, that if we live the life that the Rebbe expects of us and the Rebbe taught us and the Rebbe instructed us, in turn we stay connected to that tzaddik, who then in turn lives on through us. And what the final mention in this letter is that the tzaddik is now more accessible in the world of action too, meaning in this physical reality, a tzaddik whose whole identity is one of Torah and godliness and mitzvah, right? The nature of a tzaddik is their whole life is a spiritual life. When a tzaddik passes on, the Zohar says that they're no longer limited by their body and they're actually more accessible than even before their passing. So that is letter number 3. Moving on to letter number 4. If there are any questions, you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask a question, or you could also wait till after the letter number 4.
Well, I do have a question.
Please.
So I'm going to give a standard question. You know, he's saying that God only does good, but of course, the Holocaust and of course the Gaza situation, how would the Rebbe respond to the things that were bad that happened?
Sure. Very, very real question. And like you said a standard question. It's a fundamental theological question. I'm not even going to attempt to answer the question because the answer is there are many, many layers to that answer, but I will refer you to a book written by my father, Why God, Why? How to Believe in Heaven When It Hurts Like Hell. And it's a very deeply emotional and theological book that gives us some of the fundamental answers. I will give you one answer, and that is that the idea that God is good and that God does good and that God only does good is a matter of faith. And the question is a matter of intellect. It's a very emotional question, but it's an intellectual question. And one cannot possibly fathom to comprehend all of God's ways because we are finite and we are trying to comprehend God with a finite mind, and God is infinite. But if we accept the premise, which is a premise of faith that God is good, then we don't have to have the answer to the question. It doesn't mean that there isn't any answer. There are many answers, but ultimately the answers are not going to leave us satisfied if we're looking for an answer to navigate our own pain and our own difficulty, which is why we get up every morning and continue to believe in our mission. As a Jewish people, as a modern Jewish people with the state of Israel, We get up every morning and keep on moving forward because we do believe that there's a master to this universe and that there is a master plan and that our mission is a good one and a righteous one.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So I think, are you saying really, and I guess I already thought this, that we're not supposed to understand a lot. We just have to have faith. I guess that's what you're saying pretty much. And also,
no, not entirely. Go ahead. What's your second
I was
part?
just going to say that your father's book, which I've read twice, is amazing, and I'll continue to read it periodically. And that was a good suggestion.
Thank you. So no, I think we have to ask. Number one, we have to ask, right? That our job is to ask. Judaism supports asking. We're a people of questions, but there's two ways to ask a question. There's asking a question with an expectation that we're going to get a fully satisfactory answer, and there's asking a question because we're in deep pain. Those are two different types of questions. For a human being to attempt to ask a question about God's ways with an expectation that we're going to get a fully satisfactory answer doesn't take into account the reality that human beings are finite. And why does a finite human being think that they have the capacity to comprehend an infinite God? That doesn't mean that we shouldn't ask and that we shouldn't attempt to get answers to our questions and to try to understand. But at the same time, to enter into that question with an expectation that we're going to get a full answer, it's very different. You go into the bank and you want to know how much is in your bank account, or you're running a spreadsheet and you're running a mathematical equation. You want to know what the answer is. You can get a satisfactory, complete answer there. But here we're talking about matters of theology. We're talking about matters of the emotions. We're talking about matters of an infinite God. That's not available to us to fully comprehend God. We can get a glimpse of God. And I'll give you a poor answer to the overall question. And I'm specifically giving you a poor answer because it's to emphasize the point that we can't get a satisfactory answer. The poor answer is that oftentimes when we experience pain and challenge, it's God's way of helping us grow. And I think we can all accept that pain and challenge helps us grow. But that's not a satisfactory answer because we look at a lot of things that go on in the world and we can't fathom, we can't possibly comprehend how that pain and challenge justifies the growth that comes out of that. We can understand that maybe in a small microcosmic way in some personal challenges that we experience in our lives. But when we look at global things, and even if we look on at more microcosmic things that are difficult to comprehend, you see a young parent dies and leaves young children behind. Somebody's business is robbed and ripped off when they did everything right to protect their business. Somebody hurts themselves and for no good reason. All of these things oftentimes leave us wondering, like, where is the justification there? So we're not going to get a satisfactory answer, even if we believe the premise of the answer, which is that God gives us pain and challenge to help us grow. So the point being is it's a great question. It's a question that needs to be asked. We need to spend the rest of our lives exploring an answer to that. But part of exploring that answer is also working on our faith and recognizing that God is good and God does good, and that we have a limitation. And that's what actually makes our faith and our relationship with God a valid one and a real one, and one that's worth calling a relationship of faith. We're going to we'll actually end here to keep within our time frame, and we'll pick it up next week when we will continue with letter number 4.
Thanks.